My name is Yvette, 34 years old, and I was standing at my father's wedding reception when I saw it. The elegant seating chart, decorated with gold leaf and calligraphy, had every guest's name paired with their professional title. Dr. Matthews, Attorney Williams, CEO Thompson. Then I found mine, Yvette Morrison, Housekeeper. I checked twice, thinking surely there was some mistake. But no, there it was, an elegant script. I felt the weight of the documents in my purse, the ones that would change everything. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Please like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by family. Trust me, this story will show you that sometimes the best revenge comes with legal documentation. Growing up invisible was something I mastered before I even knew I was doing it. At 12 years old, I would watch my father Daniel build his tech company from our garage, transforming circuit boards and code into what would become Morrison Technologies. He worked with the intensity of a man possessed, and I suppose in many ways he was. My mother had died when I was 8, taken by cancer in just 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. I remember the day after we buried her, finding him in that garage at 3 a.m, soldering components with tears streaming down his face. Work became his escape, his obsession, his new family. The housekeepers raised me. There was Maria first, who taught me Spanish while teaching me to make my bed with hospital corners. Then came Dorothy, who helped with homework while preparing dinner. By the time I reached high school, we'd gone through 6 different housekeepers, each one leaving their mark on me, while my father barely noticed their names. He would come home after midnight sometimes, forgetting which woman was currently taking care of his daughter. I learned to introduce them to him, learnt to remind him of my school events, learnt to accept his absence as normal. My first memory of true invisibility happened during my 7th grade science fair. I had built a small computer program that could predict weather patterns based on historical data, spending weeks perfecting the algorithm. The night of the fair, I waited by my display board, watching other parents take photos and celebrate their children's projects. My father had promised to come. He had written it in his planner, the leather-bound one I'd given him for Christmas. At 7 o'clock, I called his office. His secretary informed me he was in an emergency meeting with investors from Japan. At 8 o'clock, I packed up my project alone. My teacher, Mrs. Henderson, drove me home and waited until Dorothy arrived to let me in. I won 2nd place that night. The ribbon stayed in my backpack for 3 years before I finally threw it away. By 16, I had learned to cook and clean, not because I had to, but because I wanted to help the housekeepers, who had become my real family. When Dorothy's arthritis got bad, I took over making dinner without telling my father. He never noticed the change in cooking style, never questioned why Dorothy seemed to be moving easier. I would serve his business partners when they came for late-night strategy sessions, bringing them coffee and sandwiches, while they discussed market projections and acquisition targets. They called me sweetheart and thanked me for the refreshments, never knowing I understood every word of their conversations. Those late nights became my business education. While cleaning up after their meetings, I would listen to them discuss leveraged buyouts, market volatility, user acquisition costs, and scalability metrics. I started recording their conversations on my phone, not out of malice, but out of curiosity. Later in my room, I would research every term I didn't understand, every strategy they mentioned. I taught myself coding using my father's old computers, the ones he had discarded as the company grew. Python first, then Java, then C++. While my classmates were on social media, I was on Stack Overflow and GitHub building programs that solved problems I heard discussed in those meetings. The pattern of invisibility solidified during my college years. I had gotten into MIT early admission with a full scholarship in computer science and business administration dual degree. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. I waited until Friday to tell my father, hoping to catch him at a good time. When I finally showed him the letter, he was on a conference call. He gave me a thumbs up and mouthed congratulations before turning back to his computer screen. That night, Dorothy made me a cake. We celebrated in the kitchen while my father stayed in his office until dawn, finalizing a merger that would triple the company's value. At MIT, I excelled in ways that surprised even me. My professors started recommending me for advanced projects, connecting me with industry leaders who became my mentors. But when my father would occasionally introduce me at business events, it was always the same. This is my daughter, she helps around the house. Not this is my daughter who's top of her class at MIT. Not this is my daughter who just won the Turing Award for undergraduate research. Just she helps around the house. I stopped correcting him after the 3rd time. It was easier to smile and nod to let his colleagues assume I was studying home economics or hospitality. My graduation day epitomized our entire relationship. I was valedictorian, chosen to speak at the computer science department ceremony. My speech was about innovation through adversity, about building something from nothing, about the invisible work that goes into visible success. My father arrived 20 minutes late, sat in the back row, and left during the reception for an emergency board meeting. He sent flowers to my apartment the next day with a card his secretary had clearly written. "Proud of you, Dad." The flowers were carnations. I'm allergic to carnations, something a father should know after 22 years. I took my first job at Next-Gen Technologies, Morrison Tech's biggest rival. It wasn't out of spite, though my father assumed it was. They had offered me a position in their innovation lab, working on artificial intelligence projects that were 5 years ahead of anything Morrison Tech was doing. I introduced myself as Y. Morrison, letting people assume the initial stood for Yasmin or Yolanda. My father never asked about my work, never wondered what I was doing at his competitor. When we had our monthly dinners, he would spend the entire time on his phone, occasionally asking if I needed money, never asking if I was happy. Within 2 years, at NextGen, I had 17 patents pending and had led the team that developed their breakthrough predictive analytics platform. The industry knew Y. Morrison as a rising star, a mysterious genius who never appeared at conferences but whose work spoke volumes. Tech journals wrote articles about the enigmatic developer who was revolutionizing machine learning applications. My father forwarded me one of those articles, once saying I should read about this impressive young developer. I wondered if he even remembered my middle initial was Y. 3 years ago, everything changed, though my father didn't know it at the time. Morrison Technologies was facing a hostile takeover from Kronos Capital, a venture firm known for buying companies, stripping them of assets and selling the pieces. I learned about the crisis not from my father, but from my network of industry contacts. Marcus Chen, the CEO my father had brought in 5 years earlier, called me directly. He knew who I really was, one of the few who did, and he was desperate. The company needs an angel investor, Marcus had said. Someone with deep pockets and deeper intelligence about the tech industry. Your father is too proud to ask for help, and the board is panicking. We have maybe 3 weeks before Kronos forces the sale. I told Marcus I would think about it, but I had already started planning. That night, I created Phoenix Ventures, a Delaware C corporation with anonymous ownership structure. I hired the best corporate lawyers money could buy, people who specialized in complex financial instruments and hostile takeover defense. I spent 2 weeks studying Morrison Technologies from the outside, using every public filing, every leaked memo, every piece of gossip from former employees. The company had strong fundamentals, but terrible cash flow management. They were sitting on valuable patents, they weren't monetizing, had overhead costs that were bleeding them dry, and most critically, they had no poison pill provisions in their corporate charter. Kronos had found the perfect target, and my father was about to lose everything he had built. The rescue plan required precision and anonymity. I approached each board member individually through my lawyers, presenting them with a simple proposition. Phoenix Ventures would invest $50 million for a 40% stake in the company, providing the capital needed to fight off Kronos while implementing a restructuring plan that would double the company's value within 18 months. The catch was that my identity as the investor had to remain absolutely confidential, protected by ironclad non-disclosure agreements. The board members were skeptical at first. Who invests $50 million anonymously, but when I had my lawyers present my strategic analysis showing exactly how Morrison Technologies could not only survive but thrive, they started listening. I knew things about the company that even they didn't understood, the market forces that were shaping the industry's future. One by one, they agreed to my terms. My father was the last to agree and the most desperate. I watched through hidden cameras as he sat in the boardroom, shoulders slumped, reading through Phoenix Ventures' offer. "This mysterious investor knows more about my company than I do," he said to Marcus. "Who are they?" Marcus maintained the lie perfectly, saying only that Phoenix Ventures preferred to remain a silent partner, that their intelligence about the company came from exceptional market research. My father signed the papers that night, unknowingly handing 40% of his life's work to the daughter he had ignored for 26 years. The first board meeting I attended virtually was surreal. I used voice modulation software to disguise my voice appearing on screen as nothing more than a Phoenix logo. The board members treated me with a respect I had never received from my father, hanging on every word of my analysis, implementing every suggestion I made. Within 6 months, Morrison Technologies had not only fought off Kronos, but had acquired two smaller competitors, expanding their market share by 300%. My father would talk about the mysterious Phoenix investor at our dinners, still never asking about my work, never noticing that I seemed unusually interested in his company's strategic decisions. He called the investor his guardian angel, said they had saved everything he had worked for. I wanted to tell him the truth so many times, wanted to see his face when he realized his housekeeper daughter had saved his empire. But I waited. The right moment would come. Behind the scenes, I was essentially running Morrison Technologies. Every major decision went through me, every strategic pivot required my approval. Marcus and I developed a strong working relationship built on mutual respect and shared vision for the company's future. He never asked why I maintained my anonymity, never pushed for more than I was willing to share. He simply called me partner and treated me as an equal, something my father had never done. The documentation was extensive and meticulously maintained. Every contract, every board resolution, every email chain that proved my ownership and involvement. I kept copies in 3 different locations, including a safety deposit box at a bank my father didn't even know existed. I wasn't planning revenge, not exactly. I was simply waiting for the moment when the truth would have maximum impact, when my father would have no choice but to see me for who I really was. 6 months ago, my father announced his engagement to Jessica Huang, a 32-year-old marketing executive he had met at a conference in San Francisco. She was beautiful in that polished way that spoke of expensive treatments and personal trainers with an MBA from Wharton that she mentioned within 5 minutes of any conversation. What bothered me wasn't her age or her obvious interest in my father's wealth. What bothered me was how quickly she dismissed me as irrelevant. Our first meeting set the tone for everything that followed. My father had invited me to dinner at his penthouse to meet Jessica formally. She answered the door wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, looked me up and down in my simple business attire and said, "Oh, you must be the daughter who lives in that little apartment downtown. Daniel said you help with domestic things." The condescension in her voice was so thick you could have bottled it. Throughout dinner, she monopolized the conversation, talking about her achievements, her connections, her vision for their future together. When my father mentioned I worked in tech, she laughed and said how nice it was that even small companies were hiring women now for diversity quotas. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. My father didn't correct her, didn't mention my MIT degree or my job at NextGen. He just smiled and changed the subject to wedding planning. They asked me to help plan the wedding, or rather my father volunteered me, while Jessica smiled that practiced smile of hers. "Since you're so good with house stuff," he said, like I was some sort of domestic coordinator rather than his daughter. Jessica immediately started listing demands disguised as requests. She needed someone to coordinate with vendors, manage the guest list, ensure the house was perfect for out-of-town guests. All of this while maintaining my day job and secretly managing 40% of Morrison Technologies. The wedding planning revealed Jessica's true nature in small, cutting ways. She excluded me from dress shopping, telling me it was for the wedding party, only then posted photos on Instagram with her cousins and friends, captioning it as family bonding time. When the wedding invitations were designed, she made sure my name appeared in the smallest possible font, listed simply as "and family" after my father's lengthy biographical paragraph. Her section talked about her achievements, her charity work, her business acumen. Mine might as well have been a footnote. The snubs accumulated like paper cuts, each one individually, small but collectively devastating. Jessica would introduce me at wedding vendor meetings as Daniel's daughter, who's helping out never by my name. She would schedule important meetings when she knew I was working, then complain to my father that I wasn't committed to helping. She told the wedding planner I had simple tastes and probably wouldn't understand the sophisticated elements they were planning. One evening, while I was reviewing flower arrangements, Jessica had demanded I handle. I overheard her on a video call with her bridesmaids. Poor Yvette, she was saying, never really amounted to much. Daniel says she prefers a simple life, never had much ambition. Can you imagine? Having a father like Daniel Morrison and ending up as basically a glorified housekeeper? The bridesmaids laughed, one of them saying, "At least I seemed useful." I documented that conversation, adding it to my growing file of recordings. The week before the wedding was when things reached their peak. While Jessica was at her bachelorette party in Cabo, I was simultaneously managing last-minute vendor crises and approving a $200 million acquisition for Morrison Technologies. The contrast was almost laughable. In the morning, I was negotiating with the florist about centerpiece heights. In the afternoon, I was on a secure call with Marcus discussing how the acquisition would position Morrison Technologies as the industry leader in AI integration. My father remained oblivious to both my pain and my power. He asked me to ensure the house was perfect for the reception, gave me a credit card for any last-minute expenses, and reminded me 3 times to pick up his dry cleaning. Not once did he ask if I had a +1 for the wedding, if I needed a dress, if I was okay with watching him marry a woman who treated me like hired help. He was too busy practicing his vows, the ones Jessica had edited 4 times to ensure they mentioned her achievements. The final insult came the night before the wedding at the rehearsal dinner. Jessica had arranged the seating, so I was at a table with the catering staff's family members, literally grouped with the help. When I pointed this out to my father, he said Jessica knew best about these things and I shouldn't make a fuss. That night back in my apartment, I made a decision. I called Marcus and told him to clear his schedule for the wedding reception. It was time for Phoenix to rise. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect California mornings that seemed designed for Instagram photos. I arrived at the venue in a dress I had bought myself, an elegant navy blue piece that was understated but expensive, the kind of quality that whispered rather than shouted. Jessica took one look at me and suggested I might be more comfortable in something less formal, wouldn't want to outshine the wedding party. I smiled and kept the dress on. The ceremony itself was a study in exclusion. I was seated in the 3rd row behind Jessica's distant cousins from Portland and her father's business associates. The first 2 rows were filled with Jessica's immediate family and her sorority sisters, all wearing coordinated pastels that Jessica had selected. My father walked past me twice, without acknowledgement, too focused on greeting Jessica's family to notice his own daughter sitting alone. When my father gave his speech during the ceremony, he thanked everyone who had shaped his life. He thanked his business partners for believing in his vision, his employees for their dedication, Jessica for bringing light back into his world. He thanked Jessica's parents for raising such an accomplished woman. He even thanked his personal trainer for keeping him fit enough to dance at his wedding. He never mentioned me. Not once. 26 years of existence erased in a 15-minute speech about gratitude and family. Jessica's vows were a masterclass in self-promotion disguised as romance. She talked about how she would bring her marketing expertise to support Daniel's vision, how their union was a merger of equals, how she looked forward to being the First Lady of Morrison Technologies. I noticed several board members shifting uncomfortably at that last part. They knew who really held the power, even if the groom didn't. The reception was held at my father's estate, the same house where I had grown up feeling invisible. Jessica had transformed it with $40,000 worth of flowers and lighting, creating what she called an enchanted garden theme. It was beautiful in that sterile way that expensive things often are lacking warmth or personality. The catering staff included Maria, my first housekeeper, now in her 60s, and working for the catering company. She hugged me tight and whispered that my mother would be proud of how I had turned out. It was the only genuine emotion I felt all day. The cocktail hour was when I discovered the seating chart. It was displayed on an elaborate easel decorated with gold leaf and calligraphy that must have cost a fortune. Each guest's name was carefully written alongside their professional title or relationship to the couple. Dr. Matthews Cardiovascular Surgery, Attorney Williams Senior Partner, D.O. Thompson Fortune 500 Company, and there at table 12, the table furthest from the wedding party, was my name, Yvette Morrison Housekeeper. I stood there for a full minute, certain I was misreading it. But no, there. It was in Jessica's own handwriting. She had personally approved every single placement card, had deliberately chosen to label me as domestic help at my own father's wedding. The other guests at table 12 were actual vendors, the florist's assistant, the backup photographer, people who were essentially working the event. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate humiliation. Jessica's friends found it hilarious. I heard them laughing by the champagne fountain, one of them saying loudly enough for me to hear that at least I had been honest about my role in the family. Another suggested that maybe I could clear their plates later since I was so good at domestic tasks. They were drunk on expensive champagne and the kind of cruelty that comes from never having experienced real hardship. My father walked by as I stood frozen at the seating chart. He patted my shoulder absently, the way you might pet a dog, and said the event was beautiful, that I had done a wonderful job helping Jessica with all the house preparations. He didn't notice the tears I was fighting back, didn't see the way my hands were shaking. He was already moving on to his next conversation, his next important guest, leaving me standing there like I had stood at so many science fairs and graduations and birthdays, alone. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, having been waiting for my call. They did it, I told him. They actually labelled me as the housekeeper on the seating chart. Marcus's silence spoke volumes. Then he said, "I'm 15 minutes away. I have the contracts in my briefcase. Are you ready for this?" I looked at myself in the mirror, at the woman who owned 40% of Morrison Technologies, who had saved the company from collapse, who had been invisible for far too long. "Yes," I said. "It's time." While I was in the bathroom, I could hear my father giving his toast. He was talking about success, about building something from nothing, about how the mysterious Phoenix investor had saved his company when all seemed lost. He called them his guardian angel, said he owed them everything, wished he could thank them in person. Jessica added that she looked forward to meeting this mysterious benefactor, that as the new Mrs. Morrison, she would be taking an active role in company decisions. I almost laughed at the irony. I returned to the reception and took my seat at table 12. The florist's assistant tried to make conversation, asking how I knew the couple. "I'm the bride's housekeeper," I said, playing into the narrative they had created. She looked confused but didn't press. We ate in relative silence, while the main tables erupted in laughter and congratulations. Every few minutes, I would check my phone, tracking Marcus's location as he got closer to the venue. The moment was almost here. I felt the weight of 3 years of secrets, of 26 years of invisibility, of a lifetime of being underestimated and overlooked. The contracts in my purse seemed to pulse with potential energy, waiting to shatter the careful illusion my father and Jessica had built. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready. Marcus entered during the dessert course, his presence immediately commanding attention. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the average annual salary, his CEO presence filling the room like electricity. My father noticed him immediately, his face lighting up with surprised pleasure. Marcus Chen, the CEO of Morrison Technologies, attending his wedding was an unexpected honor, a validation of his status. My father rushed over to greet Marcus, pumping his hand enthusiastically, while Jessica materialized beside them, her smile bright and calculating. She immediately started talking about her marketing background, how she looked forward to contributing to Morrison Technologies' growth. Marcus listened politely, his eyes scanning the room until they found me at table 12. He excused himself from their conversation mid-sentence and walked directly toward me. The room seemed to shift as Marcus navigated through the tables, ignoring the attempts of various executives to catch his attention. Every eye followed his path, wondering why the CEO was heading toward the vendor table toward the housekeeper. I stood as he approached my heart, steady, despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. He extended his hand formally, professionally, making sure everyone could see the gesture of respect. "Miss Morrison," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the now silent reception hall. "I apologize for arriving late. I know we have urgent business to discuss regarding the Shanghai acquisition." The room collectively held its breath. Jessica's laugh cut through the silence, sharp and dismissive. "She must have you confused with someone else. That's just Yvette, she helps with the housework." Marcus turned to Jessica with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No confusion at all, Mrs. Morrison. I'm here to speak with my business partner." Marcus then turned to address the room, his voice clear and authoritative. He asked my father for the microphone, and my father, too confused to refuse, handed it over. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, "I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I believe it's time for some long overdue recognition. For the past 3 years, Morrison Technologies has been saved, rebuilt, and transformed by a brilliant strategic mind. Someone you all know, but have never truly seen. I am here tonight," Marcus continued to honor my business partner, Y. Morrison of Phoenix Ventures, the woman who invested $50 million to save Morrison Technologies from hostile takeover. The woman who owns 40% of the company and has been the strategic architect of every major decision we've made in the past 3 years. He paused, letting the words sink in. Yvette Morrison is not a housekeeper. She is the largest individual shareholder of Morrison Technologies, and the reason this company still exists. The silence was deafening. My father's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. Jessica's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and rage in the span of seconds. The board members present began murmuring among themselves, pieces clicking into place, the mysterious Phoenix investor's identity finally revealed. Someone started recording on their phone, then another, then dozens of guests had their cameras out. Yvette, Marcus said, turning back to me with genuine warmth, "Shall we discuss the Shanghai acquisition? The terms you proposed in yesterday's board meeting were aggressive but brilliant. I have the contracts here for your signature. He pulled out a leather portfolio, extracting documents that bore the Morrison Technologies letterhead and Phoenix Ventures logo side by side. $300 million expansion into the Asian market contingent on my approval as the controlling shareholder. My father finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You're Phoenix. You're the investor. But how, when, why didn't you tell me? I stood slowly reaching into my purse to pull out my own set of documents. 3 years ago, I said my voice steady and clear when Kronos Capital was about to destroy everything you built. I created Phoenix Ventures. I invested $50 million of my own money I earned from my patents and my work that you never bothered to ask about. Jessica stepped forward, her perfect composure cracking. This is impossible. She's nobody. She's just the help. You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke to ruin my wedding. Marcus pulled out his phone and projected an email onto the white wall behind the head table. It was the original investment agreement signed by every board member, including my father, clearly showing why Morrison Phoenix Ventures as the majority investor. The date stamp was from 3 years ago, legally binding and absolutely authentic. I walked to the front of the room, passing my father, who stood frozen in place. For 26 years, I began addressing the room, but looking at him, I've been invisible in this house. I was the girl who helped around the house while building programs that revolutionized predictive analytics. I was the MIT valedictorian you introduced as someone who helps with domestic things. I was the daughter whose achievements you never noticed because you were too busy to see them. But I saw everything. I continued. I sat in this very room serving coffee to your business partners while learning how you think, how this industry works, how to build something from nothing. You taught me well, Dad, even if you didn't know you were teaching me. And when your company, your life's work was about to be destroyed, I used everything I had learnt to save it. Not because I had to, but because despite everything, I couldn't watch you lose what you had built. The board members present began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to genuine appreciation. They had worked with Phoenix Ventures for 3 years, had seen the brilliant strategies and decisive leadership, had wondered about the mysterious investor's identity. Several approached me, with handshakes and business cards, welcoming Y. Morrison to the public sphere. The Phoenix had finally revealed herself. Jessica was practically screaming now, demanding to see lawyers, claiming fraud, insisting that as my father's wife she had rights to the shares. Marcus calmly informed her that the investment predated their marriage by years, that ironclad contracts prevented any claim she might have, and that furthermore, the prenuptial agreement my father had signed at my quiet insistence through his lawyers protected the company assets completely. She turned to my father, demanding he do something, but he was still staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. My father's first coherent response was anger, the default emotion of powerful men when their worldview shatters. You deceived me, he accused, his voice growing stronger. You let me think some stranger saved my company when it was you all along. You made a fool of me. I let him rage, standing calmly while the wedding guests watched this family drama unfold like a soap opera they couldn't stop watching. When he paused for breath, I responded with 26 years of suppressed truth. I deceived you, I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. You never once asked about my work at NextGen. You never attended my MIT graduation, where I gave the valedictorian speech. You introduced me as domestic help to every business associate you ever brought home. You deceived yourself, Dad. I just stopped correcting your assumptions. I pulled out my phone and played a recording from a board meeting 2 years ago. It was my father's voice praising Phoenix Ventures' strategic vision, calling them the smartest investor he had ever worked with, saying he trusted them implicitly with his company's future. Then I played another recording from last month, him telling Jessica that I lacked ambition, that I was content with a simple life, that he wished I had inherited his drive for success. The cognitive dissonance was visible on his face. Jessica tried to interject, but Marcus shut her down with a look that could have frozen fire. This was between father and daughter now, between the man who had built an empire and the woman who had saved it. The wedding guests had given up any pretense of not watching their phones out, recording what would undoubtedly become viral content within hours. I revealed everything systematically, like presenting evidence in court. The anonymous donations to keep his mother comfortable during her cancer treatment payments he thought came from insurance, but actually came from my personal account. The mortgage payments on his childhood home that he thought were covered by a generous bank, but were actually paid by Phoenix Ventures. The investigators I hired, who discovered Jessica's previous engagement to an elderly tech executive, who died under mysterious circumstances, information I had shared with his lawyers, to insist on the prenuptial agreement. You've been protecting me. My father asked, his anger deflating into confusion. All this time you've been protecting me while I treated you like you were nothing. I didn't protect you, I clarified. I protected the company. I protected the thousands of employees who depend on Morrison Technologies for their livelihoods. I protected the innovation and progress that your ego almost destroyed. You were just a beneficiary of that protection. Jessica made one last desperate attempt to salvage her position. This changes nothing, she declared. I'm still Mrs. Morrison. I'm still the wife of the founder. I'll be taking my rightful place in the company, regardless of this little revelation. I actually laughed for the first time all day. Mrs. Morrison, I said, using her new title with deliberate irony, you're the wife of a man who owns 35% of Morrison Technologies. I own 40%. Marcus and the board own the rest. You're married to a minority shareholder. The full implications hit her like a physical blow. Without majority control, my father couldn't guarantee her any position in the company. Without majority control, he couldn't make unilateral decisions. Without majority control, he was essentially my employee. The prenuptial agreement she had signed, thinking she was marrying into unlimited power, now looked like the cage it was designed to be. She had married a figurehead, not an emperor. Marcus stepped forward with more documents. These are the board resolutions passed over the last 3 years, he announced. Every single one required Phoenix Ventures' approval. Every strategic decision, every major expenditure, every acquisition and merger, all approved by Yvette Morrison. She hasn't just been an investor, she's been the de facto leader of this company. We've simply been waiting for her to step out of the shadows. My father sank into a chair, his wedding day transformed into a business funeral. The other board members present began discussing the implications, openly talking about the quarterly meetings, where Phoenix's insights had guided their decisions, the strategic pivots that had seemed prescient, but now made sense, knowing they came from someone who had grown up immersed in the company's culture. Several suggested immediate restructuring, promoting me to an official executive position. I raised my hand for silence, and remarkably the room obeyed. As the largest shareholder, I said, addressing the board members formally, I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. We'll discuss the new leadership structure and the strategic vision moving forward. I turned to my father. You have 2 choices. You can accept me as an equal partner, and we can work together to build something even greater, or I can sell my shares to NextGen, who have been making offers for 3 years. Your company or your ego. Choose. Jessica chose that moment to have a complete meltdown, screaming about her ruined wedding, her destroyed plans, her humiliation. She threw her bouquet at me, missing by several feet, then stormed out in tears, her bridesmaids trailing after her like confused ducklings. The wedding photographer, a true professional, kept taking pictures throughout the entire scene. I made a mental note to buy the complete set for my office. 3 months have passed since the wedding that became a corporate coup. My new office occupies the top floor of Morrison Technologies headquarters, a space my father had reserved for future expansion but never used. The nameplate on my door reads, Y. Morrison President and Chief Strategic Officer. It's made of the same brass as my father's CEO nameplate, though his now includes a new line, Report to President. The transition wasn't smooth, but it was necessary. The first Monday after the wedding, I walked into the boardroom, not as a voice on a screen, but as myself. Several board members stood and applauded when I entered. My father sat at what had been his usual spot at the head of the table until I pointed to the seat to my right. That's your seat now, I told him. He moved without argument. The fight completely drained from him. Jessica filed for annulment within a week, claiming fraud and deception. The prenuptial agreement I had insisted upon through carefully placed suggestions to his lawyers held firm. She left with the designer clothes on her back and the wedding gifts from her side of the family. The last I heard, she was in Miami trying to land another wealthy executive. My father aged 5 years. In 5 days, the reality of his blindness hitting him in waves of regret and recognition. But something unexpected happened over the following weeks. Without the burden of maintaining his ego, my father began to actually see the business clearly for the first time in years. He started asking real questions, listening to answers, admitting when he didn't understand something. We began working together on a new artificial intelligence project, combining his hardware expertise with my software innovation. For the first time in 26 years, we were having real conversations. The company thrived under transparent leadership. Stock prices increased by 40% once the market learned that the mysterious Phoenix Ventures, was actually a Morrison that the company had stable visionary leadership. We launched 3 new products in the first quarter, all based on strategies I had developed while sitting in the shadows. Employee satisfaction scores reached an all-time high when I implemented the workplace improvements I had heard discussed but never acted upon during those late-night meetings. Marcus became my closest advisor and eventually something more, though we kept that relationship separate from business. He told me he had suspected my identity for the last year, but respected my need to reveal it on my own terms. He was there the day I finally moved my mother's picture into my office, placing it where I could see her while making the decisions that would shape the company's future. She would be proud, he said simply, and I knew he was right. My relationship with my father remains complicated but evolving. Last week he brought me coffee while I was working late, correctly prepared with oat milk and half a sugar details he had learned by actually paying attention. We don't talk about the years of invisibility often, but when we do, he listens without defending himself. He's learning that listening is more valuable than talking, that seeing requires more than just looking. The house where I grew up has been transformed into a technology incubator for young female entrepreneurs. I fund it personally outside of Morrison Technologies, giving invisible girls the chance to be seen. Maria, my first housekeeper, runs the hospitality side of it, making sure these young women feel at home while building their dreams. Dorothy sends cookies every month addressed to the CEO who never forgot her kindness. Some nights I stand in my office looking out at the city lights, holding the housekeeper place card from the wedding that I kept as a reminder. It's framed, now hung where only I can see it, a monument to underestimation. Next to it hangs my MIT diploma, my patents, and a photo from last month's Fortune magazine cover. From housekeeper to power broker, the headline reads, "The Hidden Heiress Who Saved Morrison Technologies." But the most important thing on my wall is a letter from a 16-year-old girl in Ohio who read about my story. She wrote that her father doesn't notice her, either that she's invisible in her own home, but that my story gave her hope. She's teaching herself to code. She said, building something in secret that will change everything. I wrote her back personally, telling her that invisibility can be a superpower if you use it right, that the shadows are where you learn to shine. I've learnt that revenge isn't about destroying those who hurt you. It's about building something so undeniable that their opinion becomes irrelevant. My father tagged me as a housekeeper at his wedding, a label meant to diminish and confine me. But I had already built my house of cards into an empire, one strategic decision at a time. Now I run the house, the company house, with 40% ownership and 100% determination. The truth is, I spent years as an invisible housekeeper in my father's eyes, serving coffee and cleaning up after meetings while absorbing every lesson the business world had to offer. I learned that power isn't given, it's taken. Respect isn't granted, it's earned. And visibility isn't about being seen, it's about being undeniable. I built my power in the shadows, structured my revenge in spreadsheets and contracts, and revealed myself only when the impact would be absolute. Every young woman who feels invisible in her family, who's overlooked in her workplace, who's underestimated in her relationships, needs to know this. Your invisibility is not your weakness, it's your training ground. While they're not watching, you're learning. While they're dismissing you, you're building. While they're categorizing you as the help, you're becoming the boss. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's succeeding so completely that their wrongness becomes obvious to everyone, including themselves. My father calls me President Morrison now, with a mixture of respect and regret that will probably never fully resolve. Jessica became a cautionary tale in the tech world about gold diggers who don't do their due diligence. Marcus and I are taking Morrison Technologies into markets my father never dreamed of reaching. And somewhere out there, invisible daughters are writing code-building companies and preparing for the day when they'll step out of the shadows and show the world who they really are. The place card from the wedding sits in my desk drawer, now a reminder that labels only have the power we give them. Housekeeper, daughter, helper, these were the words used to make me small, but I was never small. I was compressed like carbon under pressure, turning into something harder, clearer, more valuable. Now when people ask me for advice, I tell them this: if they label you as the help yourself to everything they're not protecting. If they call you invisible, use that superpower to see everything they're hiding. If they seat you at the back table, remember, that's where you can see the whole room. What's your story? Have you ever been labeled as something less than you are? Have you been overlooked by the very people who should see your worth? Drop a comment below and share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about underdogs who became overlords. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their invisibility is just the first chapter, not the whole book. Remember, the best revenge is massive success, and the best time to reveal it is when they least expect it. Thank you for watching, and to all the invisible daughters out there, your time is coming. Build in silence, reveal with thunder, and never forget that housekeepers have keys to every room in the house, including the boardroom.